She's the unemployed wife who allegedly lived off her hedge fund manager husband, and now she is accused of a horrific crime. Allegedly drunk, flooring it in a $100,000 Porsche, plowing into a man who was just on a first date grabbing some donuts. We could soon learn if this woman will be trading a luxurious lifestyle for the less glamorous decor of a prison cell. And just wait until you hear what her defense is. I'll give you a hint. Designer shoes. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. The victim in this case was allegedly hit so hard by the suspect that the person he was walking alongside didn't realize he had been thrown 30 feet into the air. That is how allegedly swift and violent this crash was. And this is the woman who is allegedly responsible. Her name is Kristina Chambers, and up until the early hours of April 19th, 2023, life seemed to be pretty good for her. Chambers was married to a hedge fund manager. Now, according to Glassdoor, that job on average pays between $300,000 and $450,000 a year. And honestly, when I looked that up, I was surprised because that feels low compared to what some of the heavy hitters in that industry make. Either way, let's face it, it's a lot of money, and apparently it was enough money that Chambers didn't have to work. Not only did she reportedly live in a $1 million home in Houston with her husband, he also allegedly bought her quite the ride, a $100,000 Porsche. Now that's a sports car. It can go fast and it can do it quick. It's something that prosecutors are arguing. On the night of the crash, Chambers wanted to show off to two friends who were in the back seat just how fast this car could go. On the night in question, Chambers was out with some friends. They allegedly hit up 4 bars. Prosecutors say the driver had at least 6 alcoholic drinks. Chambers wasn't just driving a nice car. She also was wearing a designer outfit, including Christian Louboutin heels. With their trademark red bottoms, those can go for thousands of dollars. And I'm specifically bringing up those shoes because they allegedly play a big part in what happens next. It was in the early hours of that morning that Chambers and company decided that it was time to call it a night. So they packed into that Porsche and they hit the road. On that same night, 33-year-old Nicholas McMullen was taking a chance on a first date. It was around 2:35 in the morning, and it sounds like that first date was going pretty well, because he and the woman who he was with decided to cap off the evening with a donut. So they're at the donut shop, they grab the treats, they grab the coffee, and McMullen and his date were walking back to their cars when it happened. A Porsche, allegedly going more than 70 miles per hour on a city street, plowed into McMullen, sending him 30 feet in the air. According to the Houston Chronicle, the woman he was on a date with says all of this happened so fast that when she turned to warn McMullen to get out of the way, he was already gone. She just remembers feeling something brush up against her hip. That's it. The 33-year-old lover of music, he worked at the University of Houston, he was pronounced dead on scene. Now, the driver of that Porsche, of course, was allegedly Kristina Chambers. She was arrested about an hour after the crash, and the Chronicle is reporting that medical records show that her blood alcohol level was about 4 times the legal limit. We're talking an hour after all of this happened. She is still allegedly 4 times over the legal limit. Prosecutors also say they searched the Porsche and they found little baggies of cocaine in the vehicle. Chambers was arrested. She is currently on trial for manslaughter. She was granted a $50,000 bond a week after her arrest. So she's been free ever since she posted that bond. Days after her bond was set, her husband, the hedge fund manager, filed for divorce. That divorce was finalized in February of last year. So look at what the prosecution has in this case. They have witnesses to this horrific crash, including the woman who was standing alongside McMullen when it happened. They also have these medical records allegedly showing that Chambers was quite drunk at the time of the crash. So what could her defense be in this manslaughter trial? Well, it seems to center around those very expensive $1,000 designer shoes that she was wearing when she was behind the wheel. Chambers' defense attorney says that her heel got stuck on the gas pedal and she could not stop the Porsche before it plowed through McMullen. Not only that, Her attorney also claims that this crash happened at one of Houston's most dangerous curves, and there have been several bad crashes at this location in the past. Now, there's been a lot of legal jockeying back and forth over the last couple of years since all of this took place. The Chronicle says that both sides have tried to get evidence thrown out ahead of this trial. The defense, they filed a motion to have the purse found in the car with those baggies of cocaine in it excluded, as well as the blood test that showed her alleged level of intoxication. On the prosecutor's side, and this is interesting, they didn't want any mention that Chambers could be pregnant. Now, it's unclear if she is actually pregnant, but the defense could bring that up in a penalty phase if she is found guilty of manslaughter, according to the newspaper. It's always incredibly shocking and sad when you see stories like this one where someone's life ends just like that. And that's certainly the case of Nicholas McMullen. Now you look at Kristina Chambers' side, what she's accused of, it's absolutely horrific. But when we looked her up on truthfinder.com, other than the manslaughter charge that she's currently facing, and that did come up, she's never been in trouble with the law before. But all of that obviously now has changed, and she could spend up to 20 years in prison if found guilty. Now here at Law and Crime, we partner with Truthfinder and we use it to learn more about the people who are involved in our stories, like Kristina Chambers in this case. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great tool to give you some peace of mind because it's one of the largest public records search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone, and right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Not only is this case playing out in criminal court, but McMullen's family has also filed a civil suit, which will go to trial in the spring of next year. Not only does that lawsuit blame Chambers for the crash, but it also takes aim at the bar she allegedly was at for allegedly over-serving her, and it takes aim at the portfolio manager, now ex-husband, who prosecutors argue bought her that Porsche, allegedly knowing that she had a drinking problem. Chambers' defense attorney says that the ex-husband actually bought her that car because they were having some marital issues and it was more a gift in trying to get her forgiveness. McMullen's family wants more than $1 million in that case, which will be decided by a jury in civil court. As far as the criminal case, again, that trial is going on right now. Chambers could be sentenced to up to 20 years in prison if she is found guilty of manslaughter. Joining us now to talk more about this is civil rights attorney Joe Richardson. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. As we're watching this trial play out in Houston, seems like the prosecution has a pretty strong case, in my non-lawyer opinion, just with her level of intoxication allegedly. But she's arguing that it was the designer shoe getting hooked into the gas pedal. What do you make of that argument for her?
The it was a shoe defense. I always like to use that one. No,
right.
I don't know how much mileage it'll get. One of the things I think that they did, the prosecution did, that put them probably in a better space, they started off with manslaughter through intoxication. And what they did was they broadened it to say just manslaughter. So any and all things, including her intoxication can lend to recklessness, speeding. All of those things are in play. So she doesn't get to just say, it was the shoe that did it, because there are reasons other than her foot that she actually was in this situation. So what I think is the shoe defense probably doesn't do a whole lot, because now they've got more things they've got to defeat. This is not just about her drinking, even though 3-4 times the legal limit is not a help, right? They can use factors that include, but are not necessarily limited to, the fact of her intoxication. And I don't know that her shoe getting stuck on the gas pedal is going to help her, particularly given some of the other testimony that'll come from even friends of hers.
And it sounds, and it doesn't appear that cameras are allowed in court for the trial. I'm seeing some sketches come out. But just hearing from the person who was on the date with Nicholas McMullen, and that she looked, it's just shocking to think, because only a few people have witnessed something like this, but she looked to tell him to get out of the way and he was already gone. Like, that's how fast the car was apparently going. Though her defense is arguing this was a really dangerous curve in Houston, there's been other crashes in the past. In these types of cases, how far, you have the shoe defense, how strong is that? How strong is the defense that this was just a very dangerous street that she was driving on?
I don't think it helps, because what that means is if you know it's a dangerous street and you're familiar with it, that means you shouldn't be taking it at 70 miles an hour or 80 miles an hour. You have to drive, typically there might be a speed limit. First of all, I'm sure she was killing the speed limit, pardon the expression, but you're also not supposed to drive faster than it's safe. So if it's 35 miles an hour, but it's raining, for instance, or it's snowing, or it's slippery, or there's a crowd of people, then 35 might not be the most safe speed to drive at. So it still doesn't take away her obligation to do what she needs to do, because it's a dangerous curve, if that's the case.
I don't know how much of this would be brought in for trial, but certainly for on the civil side of things is accusations that she was an alcoholic or she was someone that regularly went out drinking. In this case, the blood alcohol level being 3-4 times the legal limit. I mean, that's significant. How does the history, because if you're talking about a specific moment that something happens and what caused that moment to happen, how does somebody's history, if she was someone that went out to have drinks fairly often or had a good amount to drink, was known to drink or get drunk, how could that past factor into what played out in that specific moment on that road?
There's a couple things. First of all, when you're talking about negligence, the key to negligence is foreseeability. You could foresee, for drinking, for speeding, etc., not only do you have a duty, but it's foreseeable that you not doing what you need to do in this regard could get somebody hurt. That's one particular thing. That's one way that it plays in, and it might, of course, make a jury less sympathetic. Seeing that ahead of time, it makes the case more likely to get resolved at a higher level. The other thing that is very state to state, I don't know if, because the divorce is happening, I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves, that there's an argument that there's less money available. Sometimes with intentional conduct, you can't BK a judgment out or away. And so, and it might be in a certain case, she may say, well, I can BK this out, but based on this conduct, if we've got intentional conduct, grossly negligent, beyond regular negligence, sometimes in certain states, I'm not sure how Texas does it, you couldn't discharge it in bankruptcy because it's intentional conduct. So it might play, that's off in the backdrop somewhere, but it might play into that as well.
On the criminal side, just was thinking about this because, again, she was driving 70 miles per hour on a road. I mean, in Houston, if you ever been, the traffic's horrific. So it's like no one's ever going 70 miles per hour in Houston. I know it was 2:30 in the morning when this happened. So she's on a road that, blasting through the speed limit. She is, you have the medical records that showed that she was drunk at the time that all of this happened. I mean, that seems like such a strong case. And I know that there was a lot of back and forth leading into the trial. Are you surprised that this actually went to trial instead of her finding some sort of deal?
Yes and no, because it seems like to me she would be looking for a deal. She ought to be hot to trot looking for a deal because these facts aren't particularly good. But at the same time, maybe the prosecution goes in not so generous in terms of offering a deal because they feel pretty confident that they can convict her, particularly once they broadened the manslaughter charge. So it might be a situation where, this is really conscience shocking. And, you've got this poor guy that's on his first date and he literally is removed from the person next to him. And everybody can see this coming. Her friends got her as an alcoholic. She puts the pedal to the metal, particularly with this new car and all these other things. Yeah. Prosecution might say, we're not going to give you a whole lot here.
Yeah, and I think, too, if she's found guilty, it's in Texas, the sentence could be between 2 and 20 years, which is a very wide range when it comes to manslaughter. And there's this other part that the Houston Chronicle is reporting that the prosecution wanted to push back on any, I guess, suggestion that she might be pregnant, but it's unclear if she is pregnant. But if she is, that's something that the defense could use in a penalty phase. How could that argument impact how many years she could get in prison if she is found guilty?
Well, if I'm her and I'm found guilty, if I'm her team, I'm absolutely going to be able to want to say that she's pregnant, she's gotten into a program, she's not drinking, she hasn't drank in a certain period of time. Now she's pregnant, so she needs to be there for her child. And so therefore, they're going to ask for as lenient a sentence as possible. If not, I don't know even if the 2 years is necessarily mandatory, or if the 2 years can be served in house arrest or something like that. I'm absolutely going to use that and take that for a spin, because I'm going to say that this innocent child, shouldn't have their mother away for 10, 20 years, of which she'd have to do 10. She would miss her childhood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And I know each state and certainly each judge, I mean, we've seen sometimes where sentences, you're like, whoa, this judge wasn't messing around. And then there's other cases where a judge makes a decision and everybody's like, that's it. But when you're looking at 2 to 20 years, what typically factors into, like in a case like this where it doesn't appear she has a criminal record, I didn't even find any previous DUIs that she had. So it seems like this is her first run-in with the law. And if that's the case, how does that factor into just how long, compared to other manslaughter cases where you might see someone get 20 years, where just as we're sitting back here looking at this, if she's found guilty, and of course she could be found innocent, we don't know, how long do you think that she could get behind bars?
Yeah, you've got both aggravating and mitigating factors, right? You would think that a big mitigating factor would be that she hasn't gotten in trouble before. But if the evidence suggests that really she could have gotten in trouble and should have gotten in trouble, because she's been doing this for a long time. Apparently she told a social worker that she has 4 or 5 drinks 2 or 3 times a week, where this was just a ticking time bomb. It might make her a little bit less sympathetic. But my first inclination would probably be, under these particular circumstances, that maybe it's middle towards lower end. Particularly if most people in her circumstances convicted for their first crime get middle to lower end, even though there are some aggravating factors here.
When a penalty is listed as a 2 to 20 year prison sentence, if someone's found guilty of it, does that mean they will have to go to prison for at least 2 years if she's found guilty?
That would be the recommendation, and now we're kind of going to state thing, which could be specific, and which could be very particular. And, states are a little bit different in that, whereas on the federal side, you're going to do 80-85% of your time. That's not going to happen in the state. So, for instance, in California, if somebody got 2 years in prison, they might be allowed to do it in county jail. Most of the time, if you get a year or more, you're going to prison. If you get a year or less, you can do county jail. If she got 2 years, there's an argument that she might be able to actually do it in county jail because you do half the time. So the question becomes, if she's going to do all of that time or most of that time, and she gets actually 2 years, does she actually have to go away, as it were, or could she do something softer, halfway house, in custody at home confinement, those types of things. So there's some state-specific things, but I think I can say that she's better off dealing with this in a state case than she is in a federal case.
She was reportedly unemployed at the time. Her husband seemed to make a good amount of money working in hedge funds, portfolio management, kind of the finance world. He files for divorce. This happened in April. Early May, he's filing for divorce. I know that was final. This was 2023. It's finalized in 2024. If he's the guy with the money and she is being sued by the family of the victim and he's been named in that lawsuit for allegedly buying her the car, though they say she had a joint account, does the divorce protect him at all from, I guess, his financial liability?
Under these facts, it doesn't sound like it would, because the question is, what was the status at the time of the incident? At the time of the incident, you're not divorced. Sometimes on the family law side of things, there's marriage to separation, not necessarily to divorce. If there's no separation, then theoretically you're on the hook. And also that assumes that he can be on the hook to the extent that she can be. It doesn't sound like to me they're talking about him being listed as a registered owner. State of California, there's liability for a registered owner, but limited liability for a registered owner. They're saying he's liable because he bought the car, it happened with his money. Depending on how likely that is, if that's not the most likely scenario, then perhaps that's used, or spin it around. If it's more likely that he could be on the hook because he's the pocket, then maybe that's used to ramp up what would be paid out. But to the extent there's gray area about whether or not he actually can be liable, even though he theoretically could be for being married. I don't think the separation of the divorce helps him. Might be some other factors. That's going to affect the calculus because he's the one with the money.
And on that note, and I'm not sure how much, what the breakdown was of who got what in the divorce, but let's just say they finalize this divorce. She doesn't take anything. She doesn't take anything. He takes all the money. He has all the assets in his name. And as far as her being sued, I know the family's going for more than $1 million. If without him she doesn't have any money, and a jury would rule in her or in the victim's family's favor, like how would that factor into the family getting money if she doesn't have any without him?
Well, what we always like to say in the plaintiff's world, to be perfectly honest, is about where the pocket is, where the money is. There should be some insurance somewhere, right? And for someone with those kinds of means, they should have probably a good amount of insurance where there's a question as to whether the carrier would pay. Now, this becomes a whole lesson in bad faith, which we're not necessarily talking about, which we didn't come here to talk about. But the more likely that carrier would have to pay out potentially, they're going to be more likely to do it now as opposed to doing it later. So if I, for instance, am the wife and I think that the coverage ought to pay out and the coverage is saying that they don't want to pay out, she could actually give the people that are suing her the right to come after the carrier for not doing that. So whatever brings the carrier to the table, if it's a lower insurance policy limit, they're probably going to pay it out anyway. But they want a pound of flesh and they believe that the husband has resources. So the more likely that would happen, the more likely that is to happen, the more likely that affects the calculus in terms of what gets paid out and by whom.
I know that the civil, it'll be slated to be civil jury trial in April of next year, I believe. And then obviously right now she's currently on trial. How does the verdict in the criminal case impact how the civil case could play out?
Well, that certainly means that she would be found liable for sure. But the question is, if he's the pocket and she doesn't have access to the money, how will it affect him? That issue hasn't been resolved. I'll give you 10-1. If there's gray area about whether or not his funds should be going towards this, or whether or not he can be liable, he himself, he will file a dispositive motion on the issue to try to get himself off the hook. And to the extent that that's more likely or less likely, that affects the calculus of what he might be doing. So they are going to want a pound of flesh here from someone that potentially has resources. Any other time, you're just going to the insurance. Okay, and so we'll see what happens. The criminal trial certainly kind of seals her fate because really, even if she gets off on the criminal trial, she's absolutely going to be civilly liable. I don't think there's any way around that. The question is, and it's a separate question that's not resolved here, whether or not he would be found civilly liable, particularly if there's an issue with access to the funds based on the divorce.
And all of this took place in 2023. Here we are in 2025, and it's kind of all coming to fruition. 2026 is when the civil trial is going to play out. Not only is she being sued, the husband. You also have the bars that she allegedly went to that night. They served her drinks. She got to that, roughly 4%, 3%, 4% above the legal limit, or times the legal limit, excuse me. Just lastly, how long could a civil trial like that go, considering there are so many people that have been sued?
It could take years because everybody that's been sued is probably going to take a shot at the dispositive motion. They're going to take a shot at getting out of the case. How it normally ends is that people get together, figure out their coverages as it pertains to the bars. Sometimes it's hard to get bars unless it's clear that this person is totally inebriated and you absolutely should not have served them. Not sure if Texas does it any differently or whatever else. So, but what most of the time happens, people with coverage come together and they say, we'll pay out this, or they might sue each other. They could sue each other for indemnity and, those types of things, contribution, comparative negligence. And typically, whoever is going to be the most liable typically steps towards the front. And there's some coverage that comes from here, some coverage that comes from here, and some coverage that comes from here. But there has to be some haggling and some going back and forth to figure out what the likelihoods of liability for each of them are. And then they kind of decide from there.
And we'll see how it plays out. Certainly the civil side of it, the criminal side, currently playing out in court down in Houston. Joe Richardson, civil rights attorney. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for breaking this one down for us.
Thanks much. Appreciate it. See you, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.